Well, Antony Wood is the executive director of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. He is joining us live from Chicago. And so, Antony, let's talk about this issue of affordable housing, safety, and city planning. This was a really, really worst case scenario, what we just saw there in Chicago, and our hearts go out to these people. But what do you do if you crack down on these people, which we call like slumlords? Where do the tenants go?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge issue, and it's a political issue. I mean, the resolutions need to be at a political level. I mean, just to give a broader perspective on this, the pressure that cities are facing here in the US and around the world is completely unprecedented in terms of the movement of people into cities, and the inability of the whole infrastructure of cities to cope with that expansion. And here we're looking at a particular building, a particular issue with residential, but it's really being caused by migration of people and a lack of political solutions to really give these people a decent quality of life.
That's right. So it's economic, it's education, it's social, it's our environment. Where do we start? Does it have to start at the top? The White House?
Absolutely need. Well, it needs to start at the top, wherever the top is. And the thing that I would say, I've lived in America for 11 years. I'm not from America. I'm from the UK, which has its own set of problems. But really, the problem that I think is underpinning a lot of this is that so much of life, so much of society here in the US is just commercially driven. There seems to be a fear of regulation, a fear of government. But the reality is that these kind of things will happen when there is a lack of regulation and when there is this driving mechanism, which is really only to make money. And some people rise to the top and some people, fall by the wayside. And it's not like that in other parts of the world. I mean, if you look at Singapore, and Singapore has its own set of problems, but 80% of people in Singapore live in government-built high-rise housing. You put those 5 words together in the West, government-built high-rise housing, and it spells disaster. But there are parts of the world where there are millions of people living a high quality of life where the government has taken responsibility for providing habitation for these people.
Well, you look at this and you think, well, when there's a natural disaster, for instance, all of these federal dollars go to these towns. What happened in Houston, for instance, right? So that's helping these people rebuild their lives. But you take a look at some of these pictures in Chicago and you wonder, well, why hasn't there been a federal emergency declared in this type of situation?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, unfortunately, I think a large part of it is how much of it hits the media headlines and how much of the rest of the country or the world is looking at that particular problem. And when a strong category hurricane hits town, there's no hiding it, there's no escaping it. Whereas some of the situations that we see are no less dire in other places, but don't get the same media attention. Again, I'm sorry to say, but the solutions really are at a political level. It's not necessarily architecture or a lack of engineering. It's a lack of regulation and oversight, and alternative solutions come in at the political level.
Well, it's something that will have to be dealt with sooner than later, as it's catching up with us for sure. Antony Wood, thank you for joining us on this very important issue live in Chicago.